Hello and welcome to the Pivot Leadership Podcast. We're here to explore the intricacies of leadership, explore the science behind it, and hopefully learn a few things along the way. I developed the Pivot framework to help change work environments for the better. Pivot uses neurological science to help leaders understand their colleagues and analyse their own feelings and responses. All in all, we aim to enhance mental well-being, improve performance, and benefit everyone involved. So what does pivot mean? To pivot, you need perseverance, inclusion, value, optimization, and trust. With my guests, we'll unpick these principles and discuss how each one is vital in building strong leaders. On today's episode, we're focusing on how to build perseverance as a leader and exploring how resilience at work is imperative to this. To chat about this, I'm joined by the perfect guest, Kathryn McEwen. Kathryn is a leading expert in organisational psychology and has an extensive and varied career. In the 1990s, she became a founding member of the Australian Psychological Society's Coaching Interest Group and established an executive coaching business alongside colleagues. She holds specialist skills in conflict resolution and mediation and has achieved national accreditation as a mediator. Alongside all of this, through her research, Kathryn has developed the Resilience at Work Toolkit, providing practical strategies for building resilience and perseverance in leaders and teams, which is what I would love to tap into today. So, Kathryn, welcome to the podcast. It's so lovely to have you all the way from Australia. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you've ended up in the career that you're doing now? A bit of an overview for our listeners, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'm an organisational psychologist. More importantly, I'm Welsh. So I think that's a really important thing for this podcast. I've been an organisational psychologist pretty much my whole career, and about 15 years ago, I guess I started to specialise in an area called resilience, which we all know very well because it's a pretty popular word these days. And then more recently, I've actually developed a team app and a platform called Perspective. So it's been a bit of a journey really from working in terms of everything that's to do with organisational life, anything from individually based things like leadership development and coaching and performance management through to organisational systems, through to implementations. And I guess all of that work has come really together in terms of the work that I do in this resilience area and more recently with the app. So that's very broadly what I do.
Yeah. So our paths crossed. We were introduced by a mutual friend, weren't we, in Wales. So I'm glad that you mentioned that you're Welsh and that you've come on to talk on a Welsh podcast today. And that I remember being introduced to your work through your network of accredited resilience coaches that is now global, really. Can you talk to us a bit about that to start with? Because I know we're in a place now where you've digitalized, you've got an app, and that's really accessible for organizations. We'll talk about that in a moment. But can we rewind a little bit back to the resilience research that you did and your global network of coaches? Because I think that's pretty neat, and the work that they all do.
Yeah, so it's been a journey really over the last 15 years when people started to use the word resilience. And it was a word that really wasn't around very much 15 years ago, which I guess today we find quite surprising because it's such a common word. And being an organizational psychologist, I'm always really interested in, well, what is that? How do you measure it? And, what's the research behind it? So I started to look at, and this is in the workplace, so resilience not in a generic life way, because there was a lot of research around generically what resilience was about. So I became interested in, if you and I were resilient at work, Emma, what actually would that look like and how might we measure it? So I started off with a very simple measure called the Resilience at Work scale, and I was absolutely blown away by the popularity that measure got. So all of a sudden, because it was very practical, it was quite straightforward, it wasn't an enormous survey, what I found was that it really resonated, not just with practitioners, but also with researchers. So all of a sudden, there was this sort of parallel universe happening where I got researchers from all over the world with wild and weird theses and PhDs and, projects that they're working on. I was getting requests from them. And that was brilliant because they would then go away and they would explore it from an academic point of view and do research and validate it. And anything from, like resilience in seafarers in Indonesia through to, esteemed places like the Mayo Clinic. And more recently, we've just done some research with a fabulous company in Queensland who partnered with University of Pennsylvania and the department that Martin Seligman runs. So we have what we would call, the mainstream type universities that we would think about in terms of our positive psychology work and so on, through to really quite unique and different areas. And so that in itself created a whole momentum. And I think we've got probably over 350 citations of the work, which is pretty amazing because I'm not a researcher, and it rates me in something like the top 8% of researchers in this particular area, which is a huge surprise for me because I did have a stint as an academic for a year and decided I was pretty lousy at that. So it's pretty interesting that that's happened. But then the parallel piece, which is where I met you, of course, Emma, is it's such a practical tool that resonates and it's very holistic. That what happened was we then started to look at, okay, how do we actually build a whole range of resources around this measure? And how do we actually then enable practitioners to use it? And that was the accreditation program, of course, where we met in London around that. And so that's now grown to, I don't know, maybe we've got 16 countries with practitioners, and they range from in-house people to consultants to amazing team coaches to people who are working in trauma and counselling, lots of different practitioners who are all aiming to bring this concept of resilience to the environments in which they work. And then from that, so about 8 years ago, maybe, I then evolved to develop the team resilience measure and that work and the work on leadership and what it looks like to lead with resilience and for resilience. And again, we have, publications on that which have created their own momentum. And where the app came in, and again, a shout out to Wales for this connection, is that one of our Welsh members of the community mentioned to me that I should meet Tim, who has an app company in Britain, in UK and England, and said, you really should have a chat with Tim. So again, this beautiful synchronicity, I guess, that happened, that we then developed this app that enables teams to work better together. But it's based on the team resilience measure and some of the resources that we designed to supplement that, particularly our coaching reflection cards. So it's been this, parallel journey because I'm still an org psych. I still do mediation. I coach. I do all of the various things that I normally would have done. But it's sort of like a passion piece, I suppose, that organically just grew with no marketing, no branding, no business plan. It's beautiful. And we have community practices where people come in and you never know who's going to come in. And, that itself is beautiful because it just builds collaborations. So lots of people have linked up with people across the world through those community practices and the opportunity to collaborate on really purpose-based work. So our community are beautiful people. They're all like you, and they're all they're talented, they're generous, they're doing good in the world. And that's, for me, that's beautiful. It's really uplifting. And I have to say, I still get a sense of joy whenever a Welsh accent comes through on those community practices. So to me, it's been a beautiful bringing back of the work to where I started, really, as well, where I grew up. So, yeah.
Yeah. What you've talked about there is creating this beautiful collaboration. And I do feel privileged to be part of it because part of my journey starting as a coach was I didn't really know what my purpose as a coach was. I knew I wanted to help leaders develop. I knew I wanted them to grow, and I knew I wanted to work in learning. And then it wasn't until I stumbled, and it is organic. I kind of stumbled across your work through connection and collaboration, that it kind of really changed my perspective on what I wanted to achieve in my work and how I wanted to help people in organisations. And it also answered a lot of questions for me around how I was working and operating. So I did that self-discovery piece and then wanted to share that immediately with others. So, a big part of my career has been around your work, which, I think the power of your work is huge. And that's why I wanted to bring you onto the podcast to share that with others. On our program, we talk a lot about perseverance and resilience. So, I come in from the angle that we can't persevere unless we're resilient, so you have to start with your resilience first. How does perseverance and resilience played out in your career personally for you, do you think? Can you give any of our leaders an insight into your own journey around the work that you do and the perseverance and resilience that you have to kind of work with for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what is perseverance? Well, it's keeping going, really, isn't it, when things are quite tough? And so, I think when we're looking at that, we have to look at what are we persevering towards and how are we persevering. So, if I was to personally answer those questions, I think that I'm not a person who has a very fixed goal that I persevered towards. So, I was just watching the Olympics, ads just before the podcast today, and so if you're an athlete, there's a very specific goal, a time in, to run the 100 meters or whatever it might be, where perseverance means very, very, very directed goals, which you can chunk down and you just keep on going and you just make sure that you keep the energy going and you just do what you need to do. So for me, perseverance has never looked like that at all. I'm someone who is actually, on my assessments that I've done, because I've done every imaginable assessment being a psychologist, because I always do them on myself first, is that I'm someone who is very high in achievement but very low on goal direction. So for me, when I've been persevering, it's been more towards a generic purpose of who I am and what I want to be. And then how I've done it has been around, the values, the generosity, the collaboration. It's never been for me about status or, making money. And then if you were to look at then what are the other elements of perseverance? Well, they are really about a sense of confidence and belief in yourself that you can do whatever it is you're persevering towards. And what does that look like? Well, it looks like having people around you who validate you or tell you, look, you're nuts, And I see far too many people who persevere when they shouldn't be persevering because they're persevering in an environment where it might be even toxic or destructive, and they just feel like, oh, it's my fault, I need to keep going, keep going. And I'm seeing more and more of people persevering for the wrong direction. So what does it look like for me? Well, it means I've got this overarching, sense of where I want to be in the world and what I want to do. But it means that when things aren't going right, I am really getting people around me who can either validate or tell me I'm nuts. Plus, I think my secret sauce is my adaptability to be able to read what's going on and look at what the trends are and look at how I might orient things in a different way. And look, quite frankly, nothing really changes a lot in psychology. That we've known the basics of motivation, behavior, teamwork, leadership. We've known them a long time. Really, the only difference is, the problem we're trying to solve and the language we're using and all the trendy, names we call them. So it's a very long answer, but for me, what I've done is I've been very good at knowing when I need to persevere in a different direction and be adaptable, because I think perseverance without adaptability can sometimes be taking you down the wrong path, really.
Absolutely makes sense to me. And, as part of the Pivot program, that is, it's knowing when to persevere and when to pivot and change direction and get on the next leg of the journey and having the resilience to do that. And that's where we kind of bring your work in to support that understanding of how to build personal resilience to be able to do that. So, that's really relatable. In terms of leadership roles, because our community of listeners will be looking at leading for resilience, can you talk a bit more about why perseverance and resilience is so important in leadership roles as you see it today in organisations across, because you've got that global perspective, because you're connected with a number of practitioners around the world. So I'd love to hear about, why perseverance and resilience is so important in leadership roles from your perspective.
It's really interesting you asked that, Emma, because the last community of practice we had was actually linking the resilience work we do with the key imperatives for leaders today. And when you Google, what are the key challenges for leaders today? Well, what you get the fact that there's constant change that they need to adapt to. You get that there are frequent setbacks that they need to overcome. You get that they need to collaborate and innovate, So if you look at all those challenges, just about all of them relate in some way to resilience in the holistic way that we describe it as, not, because we're not all about the old bouncing back. It is very much more around a healthier relationship with your challenges while also adapting and innovating and having some eye on the horizon around what do we need to be proactive about. So when you frame that definition against the challenges for leaders today, really there's a huge overlap. And we're seeing, of course, more and more programs, aren't we, for leadership that incorporates this concept of resilience in various ways. So I think we probably can't be successful, whatever success might look like for you, without this scaffolding and understanding of resilience.
Yeah. And how do you think that underpins then how organisational success? Because I hear the term a lot, we need to get a workforce ready for the future, or workforce that can handle the future. And this is like the kind of thing that's being coined around in my area in the leadership space at the moment. But for me, I struggle to understand what that means in the modern workplace. So I was just wondering if you can give us any kind of insight into what you think about that.
Yes, I mean, we can work a lot at the organizational level, can't we? And look at what's the talent we need and all of those concepts that we do in OD and HR. But I believe the main linchpin between organizational performance and resilience is at the level of teams. And I really don't think we've put enough attention into what collaborative, collective leadership looks like, what collective resilience looks like. Because if you're working with a team around how it innovates better, how it has shared purpose, how the values are aligned, all those things that we talk about in terms of team resilience, then you are automatically, if you have enough teams, you are actually getting the upward forces that create the right strategy and the change. So I think we've focused too much in this area on individual resilience and organizational strategy. And I see this meeting point being the collective and teams of teams. So yes, we still need, our attraction and retention programs and so on, but they're pretty useless if we actually don't have teams who are really engaged and working on the work that matters for them to make a difference in their work. And I it's quite frustrating for me that we constantly end up on the organizational, the individual, and we don't spend enough on this collective energy, particularly for leadership, collective leadership rather than individualized leadership.
I share frustrations around this because, we spend a lot of time in organisations recruiting great talent, and, people come through real robust recruitment processes, and we've got all the tools in the world to be able to measure people coming into organisations. And then within the sort of first 6 months, resilience plays out because of the environmental factor and then the brain of the individual, if you like, in that environment, and leaders just not being skilled up enough to be able to understand that dynamic. And then we're in a situation where, well, they're not performing, but we're not seeing what we saw at interview. And it's that, for me, the frustration often sits around, what organisations promise in their environment, and then the truth of actually what that is like in the lived experience. And I find that very frustrating, because I think it's usually about resilience, not performance. And I always encourage everyone on the programme to think about resilience first. So I was just wondering what your kind of view on that was.
Yeah, I mean, we're all products of the system. So you can, you or I could be recruited as the latest whiz kid, the one that's going to turn the organization around. But if we put us in a system that doesn't work for us or with us, then we're just not going to perform at all. And this is why in our work, as you know, Emma, we do focus an awful lot on the importance of alignment of values and strengths and purpose, So if I'm being recruited in, I've really got to believe in what I'm going to be doing, but also I need to be enabled to do that, So I think quite often people get brought in, particularly at senior leadership level, they get brought in because they've got this amazing vision of what it is they can do. And quite often that is out of reality with the real organization, or they enter the organization and it's still a really good vision, but the organization's systems and ways of working just don't enable it. So people get annoyed really quickly. And of course, simultaneous to all of the changes and setbacks that I've already mentioned that leaders are facing, we're also in an environment where people walk far more easily now. Since COVID, people have a whole different view of where work fits in their lives, and also we're working globally now. So it's even more difficult to actually keep the talent now because they will walk. So lots of factors going on at the moment, I think, which make it really difficult to fairly easy to recruit, but really difficult to get people to stay.
Yeah. So in terms of the Resilience at Work Toolkit, because I know there'll be leaders listening today and they'll be thinking, okay, yeah, I get this. I can see where we need to put some energy in terms of helping with the environmental factors to build resilience through our leadership. Can you talk a little bit about the toolkits that you have and how they could help organisations in this kind of space?
Yeah, so our toolkit is probably the only what I would call systemic toolkit, because what it does is it actually looks at what do I need to do for my own resilience? What's the scaffolding that I need to be accountable for building that enables me to show up and be accountable and be the best I can be? But it also looks at collectively as a team, how do we need to work together to be able to be the best we can be in the system? And I'm hesitant to say thrive, because I think thriving can be a really hard call at the moment for some teams. So quite often it's how I can be the best I can be in the system. And those things are different, but they need to be aligned, because if purpose and values is really important to my resilience, then it's no good if I'm really clear on those, but they're actually in conflict with the team. So we have this toolkit called the Raw Team, which looks at what do we need to invest in together to be the best we can be in the system. But we also have individuals within that team who are also doing their piece of work of, is this the system I best fit with? And then the third piece, so we've got our individual piece, we've got our team piece, but then we have a leader who, as we know, leaders have the biggest impact on culture. So as a leader, I've got three things I really need to worry about. I need to worry about me. I need to invest in my scaffolding to be the best I can be and to show up and be accountable for my own part in the equation. But I need to be able to foster an environment where people are able to be resilient. So I have a responsibility for my individual people in terms of conversations around how I support their scaffolding. But I also need to create like a mini climate, I suppose, in the organization around how do we co-create this environment for us to be the best we can be together. And the third piece, because the third piece is the role modeling, is the fostering the environment. But the third piece that I see as really important is, how is my role modeling showing up? And is it showing up in a way that's useful or not useful? So let me give you an example. So if we say, right, optimism is really important for personal resilience, and I'm a really optimistic manager, and I'm, talking it up all the time and that sort of thing. but I have a team that's really tired. They've had a lot of change. They're sort of, maybe feeling a little bit under the pump. Then I need to be really mindful around the degree of optimism that I'm showing to make sure it's realistic. So there's the showing up and role modeling and looking after myself. There's a looking after my team, but there's also that real conscious self-awareness of what do the team see me doing in terms of my own resilience? And is it actually aligned with them, or is it actually creating a bit of a distance and disempowering them? So the leaders have a really, as they always do, a really tricky triple whammy, as we call it in Australia.
Yeah. The triple whammy is very present here in Wales and England. But I think what you've just explained there is some real, like 3 great layers of a 3-layer toolkit that organisations can think about in terms of using either one in isolation or all together to be really systemic, as you described it. And I know the impact is super great on the results that you've seen. So with that toolkit and then the app that you're now talking about that brings all of this together and helps people work better together in this way, what kind of results have you started to see, or outcomes, if you like, for organisations as a result of using these toolkits and your app?
The app has been really interesting because what we're able to do from the app is that people do the diagnostic as often as they like, but they also record their breakthroughs and their challenges. And it's amazing when you empower teams to identify and work on challenges, how many of those there are. And I've forgotten the actual number. I think it was about 26 or something. We're finding on teams on average, I think it's 26 challenges that they're able to solve within their scope of influence. So once you start to multiply that across an organization, you can get enormous team power in terms of teams reflecting on how they're going, using the diagnostic, looking at the challenges, looking at what they need to do to leverage their strengths and work on their development areas to better manage those challenges, then recording those results, sharing those solutions across the organization, tracking psychological safety, tracking well-being, so it's a brilliant enabler of teams in terms of delivering, but it's also a great governance tool because we have all this data that we haven't had with the report type systems that we've used in the past. We have this governance data because the organization has a line of sight on resilience, psychological safety, health, the undercurrent that's going on underneath the problems that we're not seeing that teams are surfacing. And it's all done in a really strengths-based rather than a surveillance way. So I've just found it really, really exciting to be able to use AI and big data to take this work, only at this stage on the raw team, to take this work to a whole different level and a whole different set of possibilities. And we're just really at the beginning of what that might look like. But yeah, really, really exciting to be playing in that area, which my sons still find unbelievable that their mother can do the tech startup piece.
Yeah, I love that. I'm actually getting really excited sat here, because if I think about your journey and watching you, when you rolled out the Raw 7 to start with, and then we had the Teams element that came with that. It was like, oh, this is exciting. Then we had the Leader 360, and I was like, wow, this is like a complete toolkit. And now you've gone down this road with the AI and using the app, for more accessibility, and then this big data. I mean, it's not everyone can say we can measure on these things or we can capture this. I just think I'm in awe, and so I bet your son is super proud of it. And I love watching this journey because it's just naturally growing and picking up momentum, isn't it, all the time throughout your career. So this is super exciting. So we'll get all of the links to all of these things in the show notes for our listeners, because they can then have a really good look at this, digest it, because I know we're only kind of like skimming the surface today. But it is super exciting, Kathryn. You must be so pleased with being so on purpose and delivering on this for yourself, for your own, purpose in what you do, and then having a tribe of people like me around the world to kind of continue to talk about that. It is amazing.
I think, though, it is the tribe that's enabled it, Emma, because, without people who have said, oh, this looks really interesting, I'm going to have a play with this, and have evolved it in so many different ways. I mean, there's the obvious way of, the running the webinars, but there's the less obvious way of we've just developed a new clinical supervision program where we're looking at integrating it into professional supervision in social work and allied health and so on. And then we have an absolutely amazing group they're actually all women, I think, who work rurally with disasters, fire and flood and, awful disasters, and how they've evolved it to work with that, So I think it's very much the ripple effect of people taking it and then, putting their own, piece on it and then delivering it. I mean, we have Julie, who you probably know, in Britain, who is on her 4th year of running Just Lunch and Learns through a global organization, and she can't believe how she's able to still be in her 4th year of using the role models for, leadership and professional development webinars, so she would have touched, thousands and thousands of people globally just from continuing to do that, in the same way that, you've taken the work and you've run, you've evolved different program and so on. And so I think it's very much been that ripple effect and people believing it and taking it, because without that validation, it probably would have nothing. Well, I don't know, nothing would have happened probably.
I love that. I love this about you. I love it because it is sort of really organic, and you just put it out there and then just see what happens, and it's created something really quite magical, really. And from my own journey, I can remember looking at the resilience part for my own learning right at the start of my career as a coach, and thinking, wow, why didn't I know this about myself? At that point, in that first initial point when I first met you in your first workshop. And I think it does have that impact on everyone's lives, all the leaders that I work with. I signpost them in your direction, and the response is, wow, why didn't I know this about me? So I would encourage any listeners who are listening today to take a look as a first point in your first, in your development toolkit for yourself. Oh, Kathryn, it's been lovely to have you, and I'm really conscious of time and the time difference between us today. So I want to kind of just bring this episode to a close, but we'll definitely have you back if you come back again in the future to talk more. Can you give us some of your personal strategies for maintaining focus and motivation through tough times? What do you do?
Yeah, so I think when things aren't going as I'd like, I think probably the first thing I do is I take a break from it. And I know you can't always do that. It might be a 10-minute break from it, but the power of a break, particularly a vacation, is amazing. And I think the other thing I probably do is I do maintain my energy. It's a bit home and away-ish, I suppose, but I walk on the beach and I swim, so they're my energizing pieces. But I also have fabulous people who I can have a conversation with. So I think it's taking a break from it, getting other perspectives on it, keeping my energy and nurturing myself in that, and being clear on who I am in the world. And I know I'm going on a little bit about Wales today, but I'm Welsh in my heart and I'm Welsh in my soul. And I think that those values that I learned in, the housing estates in Cwmbran were very much around social justice, equity, being a good citizen. I think all of those things are extremely valuable and have really held me in great stead in terms of my career. And a big shout out to any grandmas out there who went to the county, Conical Grammar School, who learned resilience every day walking up that damn Pennygarn Hill. I mean, I think that, that's where it starts there. And, so I'm going off on a tangent a little bit here, but yeah.
No, I love that. I love how we always come back to the roots.
Yeah. Be Welsh, be proud. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and that's where my resilience, I love how you've come back to that. It's about taking a break, breaking out of the state, isn't it? From whatever we might be, that's tricky and tough for us to manage our energy, but then tapping into our authenticity and who we are and as a person, and then building resilience from there. I think they're 3 great tips. Can you predict anything for the future around our ability to persevere in leadership? So, are there any emerging trends that you're seeing coming that maybe I might not be seeing, or that our listeners might not be seeing, that we can get ahead of?
I think it's just going to become increasingly important to be able to do that. And I think my main tip is not to see it as a sole journey, to see it as a collective journey, because my belief is that we will only be able to do what we need to do together and not alone. So, there's a lot of talk about heroic leadership is dead. Absolutely. It definitely is a joint endeavor of who do we wrap around us, who understand us, who work with us, how do we support them, how together do we persevere, because there's, the setbacks to change. It's just going to unfortunately just increase, and the multiple community societal factors that sit over that, whether it's climate change, politics, whatever it might be, it's just becoming more and more of a disrupted world. And so resilience and perseverance is that counterbalance, isn't it, to disruption. It gives us a bit of a solid state to work from, and that scaffolding word is one I use a lot, that I think really reflects what we need to have around us to be able to deal with that.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And I'm going to adopt the scaffolding word, if that's okay, because I love that. Okay, so where can listeners find out more about you and your research?
Probably just to link up with me on LinkedIn, just Kathryn McEwen. And we've also got resilience.tv, which is a website. And if you're interested in the new app, it's gainperspective.ai.
Great. We'll pop all of that in the show notes too. Thank you so much, Kathryn, for coming on today.
Lovely to see you.
Thank you for listening to the Pivot Leadership Podcast. For any information on anything we've discussed in this episode, head down to the show notes. You'll also find my Pivot scorecard there, so you can take the test and see what your Pivot score is right now. Don't forget to like, rate and share the podcast, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes.